Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and let's jump in and start to explore Adobe After Effects. It's a great application that lets you do so much from creativity to compositing. Let's explore. To start things off, I've launched Adobe After Effects, and when you first do, it can seem a little blank. That's because you need to bring in footage. Now, what I recommend is you start by coming over here to the project panel. This is where all the items that you add are going to be stored. To add items, you can choose File, Import, and then select one file or multiple files. Usually, file is enough. In this case, I'm going to navigate to a folder. I've downloaded the hands-on practice files. I encourage you to pull these down as well so you can follow along. Go into the Setup a Project folder and choose the first one, Import and Organize. Now, in here, you'll see some After Effects projects. We'll take a look at those in a moment. But to start, I'm going to select three things. I'll do this with a single click. This allows me to then click to select multiple items. In this case, you see I'm importing all of the acceptable files. Notice there is an SVG graphic, a scalable vector graphic, and while tools like Adobe Illustrator can open this, After Effects isn't designed to work with this file format. So if you see things grayed out, it means that it's not going to work with After Effects. In this case here, I'm going to select these three items and choose to bring them in. And I'll import them as footage. That means assets that I can work with. Later, we'll explore some other ways of working with things, including the ability to bring in Photoshop and Illustrator files as what's called a composition. It's effectively a sequence or a stack of layers. But for now, let's bring in footage and click Open. You'll notice when I do this, what happens is they come in as three separate pieces. If I select a piece, I can double-click to load it and drag through and have a look. In this case, I see I have some footage of a DJ turntable, a logo, which is currently being presented over black, but you can click right here to show the transparency grid if you're more used to seeing it that way, and a vector file here, in this case of a record. Now you'll notice that the file is quite a bit smaller, but that's okay because vector graphics are designed to be very scalable. What I'm going to do now is organize these just a little bit. Once I bring things into After Effects, it's sometimes a good idea to select them and drag them onto the new folder icon here. You see that it becomes a nested folder. I'll call this Footage. And if I open that folder, I can see the things inside. Now, that makes it really easy to see all of the assets that have been added. In this case, an MPEG-4 video, a PNG logo, and the Illustrator file. Additionally, you can also bring an existing After Effects project into another project. I'll this time double-click in the empty area of the project panel. It's the same thing as choosing File Import. And I'm going to select the project here called 1.1 Import. In this case, I'll bring it in as an After Effects project. I'll leave Create Composition unchecked, and I'll click Open. Here, you see it brought in everything inside of that project with a nested folder. This is very similar to the project we were starting to build, but this one's already been built. If I double-click, you can see that we've arranged the different pieces here in the first composition. We'll talk more about layers in just a moment, but you'll notice that there's three different pieces here, and much like a Photoshop or Illustrator file, they exist in layers where they can sit on top of each other. If I click Switches and Modes, you'll also see some things that are familiar to Photoshop, such as blending modes and opacity adjustments. Now, let's take a look at the DJ end here, and this is an animated version where the three pieces are put together. Now, we're going to take a look at all of these things in greater depth in just a moment, but I want you to see how a simple composition came together. In the background, we had the footage, and then slightly delayed, a logo, which scales into place, and a spinning record. If we come over here to the preview area, I can click the play button and that footage will cache and start to play back. There we go. You can see how the pieces have all come together. Now, we're going to explore building things out and adding animation, keyframes, and much more, but hopefully After Effects looks a bit like some of the other Adobe apps you're already familiar with. In this case, it shares a lot of similarities with tools like Premiere Pro and Photoshop. Layers, tracks, visibility icons, switches, etc. All right, let's keep exploring. Let's keep working with this same project. I'd like to bring in another asset, in this case, a layered Photoshop file. I'll double-click in the empty area. And let's switch to a different folder. I'll go to 1, 2, the Photoshop folder. Here you'll see several different items. First up, I have my logo, and I have some bars. Now, what we're going to do here is take a look at the individual pieces and how they can be brought in. I'm going to start by clicking one time on the logo, and then I'll hold down the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on Windows to select a second file. In this case, instead of importing as footage, which is a single piece or flattened item, I'm going to switch this to composition with the option for retain layer size. This will set the outside edges to match the original shape of the document, of the Photoshop file in this case. I can look that over and click Open to bring the files in. You see that they're added and a few things to look at. First up, because we brought in a Photoshop file, there's each of the pieces. There's the different parts. Let's turn off the transparency. Headphones, text, individual bars, and a tagline. To keep things organized, I can drop this into the footage bin. And then here's another piece where there's a bunch of different bars. Now, as you look at those individually, you might be confused what the purpose is. But notice that in addition to actually bringing in the individual pieces of footage, the Photoshop files were transformed. Here's the original logo, and here are the bars themselves as a separate element. If we take a look here, you can see a few things in play. For example, notice how the different pieces are all stored. Each is on its own track with the same name. Now, what I'm going to do is switch over to Photoshop for a moment. Notice we have 4 layers: headphones, meters, tagline, and looped. Now let's switch back to After Effects. Headlines, meters, taglined, and looped. There's each of the pieces. Well, that's pretty much a one-to-one match. Later on, we'll explore working with type layers and other things that Photoshop documents support, and you'll find that it tends to be a very seamless transition to After Effects. All right, that's looking pretty solid. And here we've split things up into separate pieces. In this case, each of the bars is independent. This will allow us to do a type of animation later. Now, let me give you a preview of what that can look like. In this case, I'm going to make another folder, and we'll call this folder Pre-comps. This is a place to store compositions that are interim or part of the finished design. Let's grab these and just drop them in for a little bit of organization. Now, I'll double-click in the empty area, and I'm going to select Photoshop. You see we have different projects in here. Okay, let's double-click, and I'm going to select this one here, Photoshop AEP, and click Open. Notice it brings in the project. And if I open it up, there's pieces inside. Well, in this case, it's just an organized After Effects project dropped inside another After Effects project. This is really common because you might build something out of several pieces, and sometimes those pieces are already started or in progress. So let's take a look. Bars start. I'll turn off the transparency grid here, and there's the bars file. How about bars end? Well, here we've got an animation. It's a pretty simple one. What you'll see is that we've applied a scale animation to each of these pieces. Now, what's happening here is it's transforming in size. Let's take a look at this first one. 100%, 73, 137. It just keeps changing the shape to create a bouncing effect of the bars. Here, simple scale transformations create the look of an actual audio waveform bouncing. That's pretty cool. Again, we're going to take a deeper look at how these are built in a moment, but I just want you to see the properties. Now, here's something else. If you press the keyboard shortcut, you could see each of these animation properties. A for anchor point. That's where the animation is focused around, the center, sort of like the hinge point on a door or where your shoulder connects to your body. P for position. Where is it physically located in space? S for scale, the property we're animating with here, which is in this case changing the vertical scale of each of the lines. R for rotation, and because the O key was already taken for out point, T for opacity, or if you need to think of it another way, transparency, which is kind of similar to opacity, if kind of similar meant exactly opposite. Now, this is a small pet peeve, but something that's 100% transparent is 0% opaque. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, just think of this as how much you can see through the object. All right, let's take a look here at the end state. Here we have another built piece for this motion graphics set we're creating for the DJ. Let's take a look at the different layers here. And we have a handful of elements. I'll turn the visibility icon off. To start, we have a piece of footage. Our DJ working at the turntable. Next, we have a solid color layer. In this case, it's being added to the layer and its blending mode was changed. Here, we're using a blending mode to mix the elements together. That purple is being used to darken and transform the footage a bit to make it a little bit moodier. Here's our headphone layer. And it has a simple scale animation as it grows. Here's those bars. Notice they move together. Now, here's something that's cool, and we'll explore it a little bit more later when we talk about keyframes. Let's twirl down the headphone layer. Notice this is a real simple animation. If we look at the transform properties, it's simply scaling from 0% in size to about 100%. But notice the bars are moving with it. Well, I didn't have to animate the bars. Instead, I just came here to the parent column and set it so that it followed the headphone layers. You can also choose a pick whip, which connects things. This is a child-parent relationship. And the idea here, which I haven't always seen in my own life, is that kids listen to parents. So in this case, the parent is scaling and moving forward, which means that the child moves along with it for the ride. It's a lot like the idea of a hand, where you can have your fingers, but if the hand moves, the fingers have to also move. But what's cool, much like a hand, is the fingers can move independently, while the hand is also moving, creating a little bit of a compound animation effect. And that's exactly what's happening here. inside the bar's composition is all those layers, and they're bouncing and moving and animating. I can close that. Well, that box or composition is put inside another composition. So as the headphones scale and move, the bars move with it and also are bouncing and animated. Here's our tagline. It's animated in the opposite direction. And our larger tagline, doing a slightly different scaled animation. Now, I want to point out in both of these cases, not only are we changing the opacity and changing the scale, but I also applied an effect. In this case, a Gaussian blur. Effects are a key part of After Effects. After all, it's right there in the name. Effects are able to be keyframed or animated. So in this case, as the text scales in, there's also a Gaussian blur. It starts a little out of focus and then comes into focus as it lands. That creates this sense of depth, and it kind of helps it as the objects are bigger, they kind of come together and feel like they're meeting here in the middle. All right, this is coming along nicely. As you can see here, we've really built the different pieces. Now, if for some reason you've fallen behind or you want to check your progress, you can choose File, Open Project. I'll go ahead and save my work to date, and I'll just put this out to the desktop, and I'm going to call it In Progress. There we go. Inside your AE Quick Start folder, you'll find snapshot projects. So for example, we just completed adding a Photoshop file. You can open up 1-2 Photoshop End if you want to catch up to where we're at. I've included these snapshot projects, so if you're following along, it's not that hard to get all your pieces together and be able to catch up and try the same things out. These snapshot projects are included to make it easier for you to really see what I've done and to try it out yourself. Feel free to pause the video now and take a look at some of the projects to date. Be sure to look at both 1.1 and 1.2 and play around with the footage that's been imported as well as the Photoshop file. Once you're done with that, come on back and we'll jump into the Adobe Illustrator files next. Let's get caught up and be on the same page. Literally, I'll go into my AE Quick Start folder, and from folder 1.3, I'm going to open up the project called Illustrator Start and click Open. This is going to have all the pieces that we need so far as we start to build. Let's go ahead and double click in the empty area here, and we're going to navigate to folder 1-3. In this case, single click on the grid.ai file. This is an Adobe Illustrator file or a vector file. Now, instead of bringing this in as footage, let's bring it in as a composition and retain all the layer sizes. I'll click Open, and it brings it in as its own composition. You'll also see we have all of the other layers. If I double click on the grid, there it is, and we have all the pieces. If you need to make more room, it's quite easy. Just click on the dividing line here between the top and the bottom, and you can rescale your timeline to fit it better and see everything. Here we have each of the layers. Now let's create a little bit of a ripple effect. I'm going to click on this first one here and press S for scale. I'll turn on the stopwatch. This enables the ability to animate. And I'm going to go forward by clicking on the time indicator to 1 second. That's 1 second, 00 frames, and press return. you'll see that the playhead or current time indicator jumps to the 1 second mark. Now let's add another keyframe. A keyframe is simply a position in time that indicates a change or an animation. If I click the stopwatch here, it's going to disable it. I don't want that. Instead, I'll click on the Add Keyframe button here, and you'll see that that's right here, the little small triangle, Add or Remove Keyframe. If I click, another keyframe is added. You can navigate between keyframes by using these arrows here. For example, if I click the left arrow, it jumps to the first keyframe. Now let's set this to 0. If I press play, you'll see it scales into place. I like that. It's creating a nice scaled animation. Let's tweak it a little bit though. Click on the word Scale to select both keyframes, and then choose Animation, Keyframe Assistant. This allows you to change the shape of the animation. Well, let's check it here for a second before we apply that. I'll click right here on the Graph Editor. This will show you the animation. Here, it's a straight linear line, meaning the animation is applied at a constant rate. Let's click again, choose those keyframes, and select Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. This means apply resistance going in and out of the transformation. Now, let's click again, and you'll see that there's a little ramping effect. If we zoom in here, you can see how it went from a straight line to a gentle curve. Now it feels a little more natural or organic. That's pretty cool. What I want to do is reuse this animation. So clicking on the Scale property here to select it, I can choose Copy. That copies just that property. Now I'll click on Layer 2 and scroll down to Layer 16. While holding the Shift key, I can click to select the remaining layers. You see they're all indicated here with bounding boxes because they're active. Now I'll choose Paste. If we play this, you'll see that they grow into place. That's pretty cool. A nice, simple animation. But instead of everything happening at the same time, how about we create more of a rhythmic effect of this building? With the first layer selected, I'm going to now hold down the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on a PC and just randomly select some of the remaining layers. This is just to create a bit of an organic type of animation by not doing everything so predictably. There we go. The selection order is going to come into play when I shift these layers around. Now I'll choose Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. This allows me to create a gentle overlap or transition. Looking at my sequence here, I can see all the different pieces in play. And this sequence is long enough that I've got a little bit of room to spread things out. So I'm going to tell each of these sequences to have an overlap. The original composition here was about 30 seconds. So if I tell them to overlap here by 29 seconds and 15 frames, that means overlap and just space things out by about half a second. I can now click OK. Well, look at what happened. We now have a very cool ripple effect that's pretty organic and staggered. Now these grow at different paces. And they're coming in a little bit more randomly. I like that. We were able to use the layered file here to bring in pieces for animation, and then a few basic keyframes and keyframe assistants to get the job done. Now, this is just a small building block. And in this case, that's a pretty bad pun since these look like blocks. But that's okay. We're going to do something a lot better with keyframes later, but I just wanted you to see how pieces can come in and how you can then animate those pieces. All right, let's keep moving forward. Let's choose File, Open Project, and I'm not going to save my changes here. I'm going to navigate to 1.4, Find Items, and open up the project called Find Items Start. You can click OK to let it be promoted. Here we have lots of different elements, and you see that the project is getting a little bit crowded. Well, that's okay. There's the ability here to locate things within our project. Up here, you see a magnifying glass indicating search. If I click on the triangle, there's different elements we can find. For example, show me everything that's used in this project. Well, it quickly opens up and I see all the pieces that are used. Or if there's anything that's unused. Here's some pieces that aren't actually in use in the project. We can go in and look for missing items as well if there's problems with the project. Additionally, let's try some things here like searching for MP4. Now, instantly it found the pieces based on the file extension. Or maybe I'm searching for a logo. There we go. I found the logo file as well as the Photoshop document logo and all of its pieces. This search engine box is really useful because as your project starts getting bigger and bigger and you start bringing in all sorts of elements, it's easy to get lost. But by using the search box here, it'll look through your project and filter the results, making it easier to find things within your project. Make sure you keep an eye on this as it's going to really come in handy. Let's keep exploring how easy it is to get one Adobe app to work with another Adobe app. In this case, Premiere and After Effects, which are like brother and sister. Here, I want you to open up the Premiere to AE Start project and this one right here. The .aep project is an After Effects project. The .proj, which is perhaps one of the longest file extensions ever, is a Premiere Pro project. You can select those two items and open them up in the timeline one at a time, or double-click and the correct apps should open. If you look at the Premiere project, you'll see that it's got a piece of footage. Here we have a couple of things. First up, the original clip. In this case, the clip's about 20 seconds long. And here we have a sequence with that clip in it. If I change this to a list, you can see the different icons a little bit better. The footage and the actual sequence. If we select this and press the F key for match frame, you'll see that I've already marked out a specific part of the footage using ins and outs. Well, there's really two ways to make things go from Premiere to After Effects. One method's pretty simple. You can just select an item, like a piece of footage, and choose Copy. Switch on over to After Effects, click in your project, and choose Paste. There's the turntable. If I open it up, you see it comes across. In this case, it's the entire clip. It didn't use the ins and outs because I moved just the piece of footage, so it's the original piece of footage. But what happens if I want those changes I made in Premiere? Well, you can move that across too. If we go to Premiere here and we select the turntable and I choose Copy, I can now come to After Effects and choose to click in the project panel and edit Paste. Now it brought the Premiere Pro sequence in as an After Effects comp. If I open it up, you'll see that it's the same duration. Here's the footage, and there's the same in and out point set. So it created a really cool transition here. You could take something you've made in Premiere Pro and just paste it into After Effects. That works great if you want to move things across. This makes it simple to do a clean handoff, and there's no linking between the projects. It's just like opening and pasting, much like Photoshop. But speaking of Photoshop, you might be familiar with the concept of a smart object, where you add something, but it's linked to the original file. Well, what's called a smart object in Photoshop is called a dynamic link in After Effects. So what we can do now is let's select these three things and just press delete for a moment. Take those out of this project. And instead, I'll choose File, Adobe Dynamic Link. And I'm going to import a Premiere Pro sequence. Now what I can do is navigate to that folder. There's my desktop. And I'm just going to go to the Quick Start folder. Open it up. And just navigate to what I'm looking for. And as I do, I can select the different items. So for example, there's the Premiere Pro project. And if I select it, I can now work with it. Let's make that a little bigger. There we are. So when I click on this, it scans through the project and looks for sequences. If I click on one that's already open, it's pretty fast. And now I see any sequences in that project. I'll select it and click OK. It comes in, and I want you to see there's a slightly different icon. So here, it behaves as if it was a single item. It opens up as a piece of footage. I can drop that footage into one of our existing projects. For example, maybe I want to put it behind the grid here. So let's put those two pieces together. Turntable plus grid, I'll drop it into a new composition. We'll put it into a single comp and click OK. Now, here's the grid and the turntable. There we go. Well, let's make a few changes. First up, the grid is shorter than the turntable. That's okay. I'll go in and adjust the composition settings here and tell the global comp to be 5 seconds, 500. Now the two pieces are matching. Let's select the grid there and adjust. I'm going to change that to a mode like soft light. And you see we get a gentle blending of the pieces. And while we're at it, let's just adjust the position of this layer. P for position. And we can shift that a little bit to highlight the armature and the cartridge. Now, with the footage layer selected, notice again that this is linked. If I choose Edit and I go to Edit the Original, watch what happens. Boom. I'm switched back to Premiere Pro. It's a live link between the two products. It's really cool. So let's say we decide to tweak this footage a little bit. I'll click on it and switch on over here to the effects for the color grading. So let's open up the workspace for color. And we're going to tweak this clip a little. So it's a little dark. So with basic correction, I'll click Auto and it brightens it up a bit. And I want to lift the shadows a little bit more and just recover those highlights a bit. That's looking a lot better. We'll inch the exposure up. And from the creative section here, I'm going to give it a really cool black and white sort of feeling. So let's take a look at some of our different film stocks. And you see different choices. I like this one. Noir 1965. I'll adjust the intensity a little bit so it's not quite so black and white. And sharpen it just a bit. Well, there we go. We've got the transformed footage. Now in the shadows, I want to put a little bit of purple. And in the highlights, I'm going to go the opposite direction of purple towards this yellowish green. That's split toning. It's a common practice. That looks good. And under the vignette, let's just put a little gentle edge there and feather it a bit. And if I toggle that off and on, you see it creates a nice darkening at the outside edges that pulls your eyes towards the middle. Okay, switch back to After Effects. Look, instantly it updates. There's literally a live link between these two projects, which is really cool. When you do this, what you'll find is that the projects actually work together, and it becomes possible to actually connect a Premiere project to an After Effects project. So changes and tweaks to the edit, update in After Effects. Now, I want to be clear. If you have these live links, it works great if you're on the same system, and you're the one doing both of the work. But if you're collaborating with someone else, that live link might be problematic because you get unexpected changes. So whether you use the dynamic link or the simple copy-paste method, either is fine. They both have benefits, and you'll have to figure them out for your own workflow. But as you see here, the ease of moving something from Premiere Pro to After Effects is a piece of cake.